very good evening all. I'm Aditi Lamba with the Thursday night edition of South Asian News, Vision of Asia, the voice of our community. We are coming to you from our studio located in New York City. Welcome again to our presidential election 2020 special, where the tight race between President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden continues. As of filming this episode, former Vice President Joe Biden is leading the Electoral College with 253 votes, while President Trump is at 213 electoral votes. Remember, to capture the White House, a candidate must have at least 270 electoral votes. The race hinges on key swing states, with attention currently at Nevada, Georgia, Arizona, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania, and former Vice President Joe Biden is edging closer to victory. President Trump has attacked the integrity of the U.S. voting system and has alleged voting fraud without providing evidence. The former vice president has been leading Nevada and Arizona and closing in on President Trump in Georgia and Pennsylvania. Therefore, President Trump has to win these states where he is leading, including North Carolina. And on that, the president appears to have grown more upset as he leads in some states diminished during the counting, and he weighed in on Twitter, writing, "Stop the count," reflecting on mail-in ballots and absentee ballots that are being counted right now. All of this surely has shown us the political polarization in this country and the deep division along racial, socioeconomic, religious, and general lines, as well as between urban and rural areas. So where do we go from here, and who will win this race to presidency? We continue to explore and analyze the ongoing election, featuring key individuals, strategists, and journalists on presidential election 2020 and the South Asian Voice. Here are the headlines. Road to 270 electoral votes hinges on key U.S. swing states, featuring veteran journalist Rohit, Vyas, New Jersey. 2020 U.S. presidential race inches closer, election 2020 analysis, featuring Suman, Raghunathan. A lot more on the other side of the break. Stay with us on Vision of Asia, voice of the community. We'll be right back. And welcome again. I'm Aditi Lamba, and this is Vision of Asia, Thursday night episode of South Asian News. We continue to present updates on this very crucial 2020 presidential elections with a very close race in key swing states. Currently, Democratic candidate former Vice President Joe Biden leads the race for the White House with 253 electoral votes, and President Trump has 213 votes. The Biden campaign has urged patience as the results continue to come in, along with counting in some states, and remains confident of a positive outcome for Joe Biden. And while these votes are being counted, former Vice President Joe Biden has broken the record for most votes received by a candidate with more than 72 million votes. So what does that showcase, and what do we need to know about the key swing states determining this outcome? We spoke to veteran journalist and political commentator Rohit Vyas. Here's what Mr. Vyas shared with us. A lot is going on. We still don't have any final results on the election, so let's get right into it. I'd first like to discuss some of these states that we're talking about right now, where the swing states are playing a huge role in this election. Let's quickly talk about Arizona. Why do you think Arizona is turning blue right now?
I think I gave you an answer to that yesterday. I think my guess was it's because of the comments that the president has made during his term against Senator John McCain, who is the son of Arizona and who is a war hero, in fact, and who ran for president himself, extremely popular figure. So I think that's one reason. The other reason in Arizona, as I explained yesterday, and again, I'd like to reemphasize for your viewers' understanding of this, is the demographics that have shifted in that state. A lot of the Latino vote, for instance, a lot of the Latinos have moved from California, which used to be their home, because of the situation with the housing crisis over there. So they all moved over to Arizona and have made that their new home. It's the neighboring state of California, and I think the changing demographics have made the big difference in this election. It's still largely a red state. I think it would have continued to be red. It still is. At this point, we still don't know whether it's going to go to Joe Biden or it's going to remain with the Republicans and, by that virtue, Donald Trump. But at this stage, it looks like it may turn blue. We don't know. Incidentally, I believe Nevada and Arizona have both told journalists at their two respective news conferences by their secretaries of state and election officials that they will not finish counting about 250,000 votes total till tomorrow, maybe the end of Friday, they say. Oh, wow. And as I explained yesterday, some states have been talking about going all the way into Tuesday, namely Pennsylvania, even Georgia. The executive in charge of elections in that state came out with a news conference later this afternoon, actually, just a few minutes before we're speaking here, saying that he didn't think their count would finish either, probably go in till tomorrow, and if necessary, they'll all go on till Sunday if they have to, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday.
Wow.
So we'll see. But Arizona, I think it's demographics, and I think it's also the comments that were made against the senator. Yeah.
You just mentioned Nevada and Georgia. The race is very, very close in Georgia. Quite surprising, quite shocking. What are your opinions on it?
On say that again?
On Georgia.
Georgia.
The race is so close. It's shocked a
Yeah.
lot of people across the nation.
Yeah, it's because in Georgia, like the rest of the country, we had the pandemic. So we all had the option, and many of us were actually told this would be the best and safest way. And the only way to vote, only if you had to vote at the polling booths, you vote in person. So they're all the mail-in ballots. There are hundreds of thousands of them going to all the states throughout the country. Those are still being counted in these 5 or 6 states, which are still up for, are the key swing states right now. And these states simply are not used to counting so many ballots. Pennsylvania, I believe, said that they would have about November 3rd was the election day. They had about 3 days after that to continue to accept ballots coming in by mail, right, or by going to the booths, etc. Not the booths, but the deposit boxes in their counties, etc. And so once that was complete, they could then continue counting. Much of the delay in Georgia has been specifically because of the mail-in ballots. And that's taking time. The state machinery simply is not used to having such an overwhelming number of mail-in ballots or absentee ballots come in, but they now have to sit and physically open them up, count them, scan them, make sure they're in the system, the votes get registered. If they don't get registered, look at the ballots physically, figure out why it's not registering, why it's not scanning, etc. Even come to a decision if the ballot is valid or not valid. Lots of those things coming into play, and they're simply not used to it.
Do you think Georgia could turn blue?
It could. It technically could, because right now they're waiting for the ballot count, the vote count from the urban centers. Okay, Atlanta, that region, some of the urban counties in Georgia, which could make the big difference. Those are heavily Democratic, they believe. Right. So it could make a big difference and switch Georgia, which has traditionally been a Republican state. It could flip it, and it could turn blue. But that'll depend on how many of the ballots have come in, how many indeed were mailed in by Democrats as opposed to Republicans, because there are Republicans who have also mailed in their votes, namely senior citizens who chose not to go to the ballots not to go to the polling stations because of the COVID-19 risk.
Wow. And looking at Michigan, were you surprised that it turned blue?
Yes and no. Yes and no. But again, the same thing over there. The same thing. That's an area where I had been predicting, talking about if some of the promises they believed were not being met, the promises made by President Trump in his 2016 campaign, then they would go blue. Because for them, it's a pocketbook issue. If you feel that things are not good at home, you don't have enough food to lay on the table for your family, if you're a male worker or even a female worker, a single mom, for instance, and if you think you can make it and that promises were not kept, you're going to go the other way. You're going to choose the alternative. So yes, I was surprised, and no, I wasn't surprised, because eventually the elections are all about how much money the American public feels they have in their pocket, in their savings banks, to secure their futures.
Did you expect us to be at this place at this time for this election? We're in day 3 of counting, and there is still such a tight race. Were you expecting it?
Yes, absolutely. If you remember, you asked me this question about whether the polls were right, and the polls were, what the polls were saying in the last few interviews we've had. And I've told you all along, I did not believe the polls. And as you can see for yourself right now, in fact, the New York Post today had a great headline. It said something to the effect like pundits, wrong, pollsters, wrong, something else, wrong. Essentially, everybody, the media, wrong. It said everybody who was trying to predict these elections were all entirely wrong. And I told you from the outset, and I said it in 2016, I do not believe the polls. The old school journalists, we have our ear to the ground. We go out there, we talk to people, we meet people. Or you engage in a conversation, or you wait and you listen to people. That's what I still do as a reporter. I go out there, I listen to people. If I go to a convenience store and I see a bunch of people talking, I listen to them. I get a cup of coffee, listen to them, maybe join in, get an idea. That's real polling, okay? Today's polling is all done by telephone, which half people don't respond to telephone calls. I don't think you do, I don't, because most of them are scam calls. They also judge it based on conversations with each other.
Right.
So absolutely, I had a feeling this race would be very, very tight, because all said and done, President Trump did get out a fantastic turnout in the last days before the election day. And if you saw his public rallies, people like to see their candidate out front, out in public. I think the Democrats, for them, it was a slight strategic error in my opinion, to try to do so much of distancing, even though it's the safest and the most prudent thing to do. Because I think Donald Trump knew that he can regale in the person-to-person contact. But I still expected this race to be very, very tight because of the issues before us.
You know, you just mentioned President Donald Trump, and I have to ask you, he is looking extremely angry. He's gone on Twitter and has said, stop counting the vote, stop the count. His campaign is already suing. There are lawsuits that are happening while we're speaking.
Yeah.
Do you think this will, I know I asked you that yesterday, is this going to go to the Supreme Court, you think, at this point?
No.
And also,
no. First, yeah, that's a good question. I want to answer this because a lot of people don't seem to understand when President Trump says, I'm going to go to the Supreme Court. He cannot go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, here's the role of the Supreme Court. You first go to the lower courts. In any case, you go to the lower courts. It then goes to an appellate court. If you're not satisfied with the appellate court in your state, you go to a superior court. If you're not satisfied with the judgment, or you want to challenge a judgment of the superior court, you then go to another appellate court, and then eventually the Supreme Court of a state. If the Supreme Court of a state rules a certain way, you disagree, you want to challenge it, you then go to the United States Supreme Court. So it's a long, long road to going to the Supreme Court. In the case of an election, it doesn't just happen that you say, we want to call a halt to voting, okay, in any election. It is very unlikely, in my experience, that a judge, even at the lower court level, is going to just halt the elections unless you provide evidence of distinct, visible fraud. If you do, and a judge is satisfied that there's something going wrong here, there is deliberate manipulating, etc., only then can a judge order a halt to counting. And then the ballot area is immediately secured, etc. But otherwise, no, he cannot just go to the Supreme Court. That's something he's been saying. He's incorrect. You can't just go up to the Supreme Court, even if you're the president, and say, I want you to halt the vote or the counting or whatever.
Time for a short break on Vision of Asia. Voice of the Community will be back shortly. And welcome back. This is Vision of Asia, the South Asian news segment, and I am Aditi Lamba. We are bringing to you updates and comments on this ongoing tough race to presidency. The race is now down to states such as Pennsylvania, Georgia, Nevada, and North Carolina, while very interesting numbers have emerged from Arizona. Pennsylvania Secretary of State said that the Commonwealth's winner could be known as soon as tonight, and if former Vice President Joe Biden captures the state, he would win the presidency. And while Biden's campaign has continued to express confidence, President Trump's re-election campaign have attempted to halt vote counting in Pennsylvania and Michigan and sought a recount in Wisconsin and has challenged the handling of ballots in Georgia. We are getting down to the wire here and bringing more analysis on this historic election. Earlier today, we spoke with political strategist Suman Raghunathan. Here is Suman's opinion. We have to get you back here because there's so much happening in the nation. We're in day 3 of elections. Nobody expected to go this far. So let's dig right into it, Suman. I'd like to first discuss some of these swing states and your opinions on it. Let's talk about Arizona. Why do you think Arizona is suddenly turning blue? And what kind of a message do you think that sends across?
Well, first off, I think it's important that we are cautious, right? Arizona is still counting its ballots right now. Many reputable news outlets have still not called Arizona statewide blue.
Right.
So I think it's important for us to, make sure that we are able to really follow the data. What I will say is that I think the story of what we're seeing in Arizona today really began 10 years ago. 10 years ago, Arizona had an extremely anti-immigrant sheriff in Maricopa County, Joe Arpaio, who was famous for rounding up undocumented immigrants, putting them in work camps in unsafe conditions, and really ran on a record of being proudly discriminatory and anti-immigrant. He was investigated by the local government. He was censured by the Department of Justice. Ultimately, he lost his seat, in particular because his opponent really spoke to the damage he had done in the community across the board by really creating a war on immigrants overall. It didn't really matter whether you were documented or otherwise. There was a presumption that if you had brown skin, you were undocumented, and by virtue of that, a danger to public safety. So Joe Arpaio was voted out a few years later, and his decision or his actions, along with in 2010, the Arizona legislature passed a very draconian anti-immigrant law called SB 1070, State Bill 1070, that basically made it the responsibility of every person in the state to prove their immigration status. And it really created, again, a war on really anybody and everybody who was a person of color, who could be presumed to be Latino or really anyone else. Ultimately was struck down by the Supreme Court later on that year. And it sent a clear message at that moment that Arizona at that point was planning to predicate its political future on targeting immigrants. That in turn really politicized and sent a strong message to the state's progressives, as well as to the state's Latinos, that it was time for them to begin to really build political power and take a stand in the political sphere, as well as in the organizing sphere against anti-immigrant policies. And so, now 10 years after SB 1070's passage and being struck down, we see organizations that have spent several years on the ground in Arizona registering, engaging, and turning out Latino and other voters. And that's part of what we are seeing that is creating this groundswell of support, not throughout the state, but in really highly populous metro and suburban areas of the state. It's why we're seeing Mark Kelly still being ahead of Martha McSally for a special Senate seat. And it's why we're seeing a possibility, even still at this moment, of Joe Biden being able to take that state.
Just continuing discussion on more of the states, I'd love to get your opinion on Pennsylvania and Georgia. Two states that we didn't expect would come so close in the race. Two states that have been red traditionally. How are you looking at these two states?
Well, I actually think that Pennsylvania has been a battleground state for quite some time, right? And it's really been on this seesaw for the last several presidential elections. Hillary Clinton did not take as much of the state as she needed to in 2016. Barack Obama did in 2008 and 2012. So Pennsylvania, I think, has been wearing its status as a swing state very proudly for a long time. Again, for a lot of the same reasons that many other states are really seeing a difference between the rural and exurban voter preferences of its residents and the preferences of those voters who are living in metropolitan areas. And it's really the story that we're seeing across the nation. So I have to say that I think, I was definitely expecting Pennsylvania to be tough, to again be a swing state. Part of what complicates the voter tally in Pennsylvania is Pennsylvania's state legislature favored by many progressives and many organizers in the state a couple of years ago. So Pennsylvania state legislature says that even though there are any number of ballots that have been cast before the election, election workers and the boards of elections or the elections offices of the state are not able to even open and to start tallying those votes until election day. So in a lot of ways, that almost builds in a situation where you do not know how the state is going to go, particularly given the size and scale of early votes and ballots that were mailed in or dropped off.
Right.
And then finally, Georgia.
Right.
Georgia, such an interesting and dynamic state, one that has seen tremendous population growth, as has Arizona. You have a lot of folks and families who are moving to both Arizona and Georgia from other states where the political environment is more progressive. In particular, in Georgia, you have significant growth in the South Asian as well as the AAPI and the Latino population. So, when you have folks setting up roots in those states, it usually takes a little bit of time, but there is a point at which the political structure and makeup of the state will begin to shift. We saw this 2 years ago with the Senate election, where John Ossoff, a Democrat, came very close to winning his race. Of course, he's now up again against David Perdue. So, I think there's been the tipping point that's been waiting for quite some time. And then the final thing I'll just say about Georgia in particular is Georgia has focused quite a bit in terms of progressive organizations and organizers in the state, like Stacey Abrams and many others.
Right.
Folks have really been focused for quite some time on building up the get out the vote and the voter education infrastructure among Black communities in the state for quite some time. And as you probably know, the demographic that is the most likely to vote on a consistent basis is Black women. And so, I think you're seeing those folks come out in force. You're seeing activists who have built up the infrastructure to contact those folks, to remind them to go out to the polls, and again, to make sure that their voting rights are protected, or at least attempted to be protected, given the challenges that the primaries found in Georgia, where there were extremely long lines, particularly in communities of color, and voters had to really wait a very long while to be able to exercise their right to vote.
Such an interesting race. We're just watching Georgia and Pennsylvania, and just seeing what is happening is quite interesting. We didn't expect it to get there. Suman, how have you looked at these last 3 days? Did you expect us to go this far off from the election day to get our results?
To be honest, I did, because we knew that going into this election, that there would be an unprecedented number of people who were voting by mail, who were planning on, in some cases, voting early, but that the scale that states would be confronting when looking at the sheer number of ballots that were submitted by mail was just really historic. I mean, the state of Nevada passed a law earlier this summer that actually sent ballots in the mail, to every voter in the state. It's never done that before. So you're seeing huge numbers of individuals, in particular because of the coronavirus pandemic, who are voting by mail or voting early or doing both, right? And you're also seeing state and local elections offices that are grappling with a feat that I think they're doing their best, but that they have never really had to fulfill to this extent ever before.
Well, this wraps up our show for the night, our special edition on elections 2020. Please send us your suggestions and get your voices and organizations on our show. Email us on events@itvgold.com or follow us on Facebook @itvgold. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel to watch many of our popular shows for free. Thank you for joining us tonight from Queens, New York. This is Vision of Asia, and I am Aditi Lamba. Take care and be well.